Good morning. It was almost like musical chairs. Everybody find a chair. All right, Justin, get to the podium. All right. Well, hey guys, good morning. Welcome to Hope City. My name is Justin. I'm one of the pastors here. So glad you guys are here today. And if those of you that are maybe are guests with us or you haven't been to Hope City all summer, that's my son Micah, who did the announcements, who's been doing an internship, which has been awesome to have him back. And I just love how he called me Pastor Justin from the stage. I'm instituting that at my house. Everybody at my house is calling me Pastor Justin from now on. So that's going to be awesome. Well, hey, if you are a guest with us today, we know that you guys could be a lot of different places, especially on this beautiful Sunday morning. And we're just honored that you would spend part of your Sunday with us. And if I can answer any questions for you or serve you in any way, I'll be at the be back by the Guest Central tent. We'll have a team back there as well that can answer any questions for you. The next class, you can go, if you download the app, you can register right on the app for that. And it'll send us an email, it'll ask you how many people are coming, that way you can plan for food. But we're really excited about that. It's going to be 2 weeks from tonight. So we'd love to host you at our home and give you a little bit more information. You get to meet our team leaders, you get to meet our staff, and we get to meet you. That's the best part, and just figure out how we can help you take your next step here at Hope City. That's the goal. So if you don't have a Bible, don't worry about it. We're going to have all the scripture that we're going to look at up on the screen. You can also, as Micah said, follow along in the app, the message notes there. But over the last long time, 8 weeks, we've been in this series called Greater. I talked to somebody from Hope City this week, and they're like, are you speaking this weekend? I'm like, yeah, I'm speaking. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we're doing the last series, or last message in the Greater series. Like, man, that is a long series. It's like the longest series in the history of Hope City. And I'm like, I didn't know if I could take that as a compliment or a slam. Mostly a slam is what I thought, or just a backhanded compliment. And then I just thought, we're 9 months old, right? Like that's an exaggerated statement to say the longest series in the history of Hope City, because we don't really have a history. But anyway, we're in the last week of Greater. And so we've been talking about this idea of how our choices dictate the direction of our life, right? What we think is it's our intentions, what we intend to do that dictates the direction of our life, but it's actually our choices. And what we said this summer is, what if we could make better choices? And better choices don't come from our belief system, they come from our values. What you value determines the choices that you make. And so if we could change what we care about and make what we care about greater, then we're going to make better choices. And so each week we've kind of started out the messages with what I think is a fun little kind of poll question to get to know each other better, to incite arguments and controversy all across the iPhone, Android thing. I still get emails and texts about that. And those of you that text me from an Android, I don't even pay attention to it. Anyway, so let's do the first one here. First one, Instagram or Facebook? Who would say Instagram is greater than Facebook? Okay, everybody under 40 has their hands raised right now. Okay, who would say Facebook is greater? Who doesn't really care? All right, there's like a lot of people that didn't even raise their hand for either one of those things, all right? Some of you are not on Instagram, some of you are not on Facebook. Instagram is growing faster than Facebook, but Facebook already has like 7 billion people on it, so there's no room for it to grow because it already has world domination. So I'm going to say Instagram is greater there just because it's got more potential. And it doesn't take as much of my time. Like Facebook just seems like this vortex that just sucks time right out of my week. So, all right, what's the next one? Beach or mountains? Who are my mountain people? Who really likes the mountains? All right, my son just got back from the mountains of California, so he's raising his hand. He got back at 3:30 this morning, so he's on a lot of Mountain Dew right now. And mountain people, anybody? Okay, 2 people. Okay, great. Anybody who say beach is greater? Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with beach is greater than mountains. Okay, final one. This is going to be low key. IU or Purdue? Okay. Who are my Purdue people? Purdue? Okay, we had the only person like Purdue first service stood up and yelled. So we have some Purdue folks. Who are my IU people? All right. See, everybody's welcome here. We can all get along. It doesn't matter what you believe, right? You can find a home here at Hope City, even IU and Purdue. Because my wife graduated from IU, I'm going to have to go with IU as greater, although I grew up like 30 minutes south of Purdue. So it sounds weird. I don't hate Purdue just because I like IU, but I know that sounds like treason to some of you. So anyway, what we're going to talk about today is this idea of enough being greater than more. And even as I say that, some of you are like, I don't know about that, because we're conditioned to pursue more. We're conditioned, especially in Hamilton County, that more is always greater than enough, that more is always better, that more success and more possessions and more wealth is always better than just having enough. And one of the things that we say here a lot is that Hope City is a place where you can belong before you believe. And so as we talk about some of this stuff this morning, some of you might go, I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I can get there. And I'm going to say to you, that's all right. Like that you can belong here even if you don't agree with what I'm going to talk about today, because it took me a while to not just say, I said I believe this stuff for a long time. It's taken me a long time to grow into some of the things that we're going to talk about with my heart, not just with my behavior. And so this idea of enough being greater than more, there was a group of researchers from Stanford University, and they did research around this idea of enough. And they asked people in France, how do you know when you've had enough to eat? And the most popular answer from people in that country was, when I feel full. Like people in France stop eating when they feel full. They asked people in America the exact same question, and there were 3 answers that were given. The first is, the most popular answer was, when my food is all gone, then I know I've had enough, or when my plate is clean. Anybody grow up with your parents making you sit at the table until your plate was clean? I did that, right? My parents would say, you're not getting up until that plate's clean. And then I would try to feed it to the dog, to clean the plate. And then the last answer was, when the television show that I'm watching while I'm eating is done. So we're conditioned to clean our plates, to eat until our food is gone, and we're watching TV all at the same time, right? We don't know when we've had enough. Another study was done with these social sciences guys, and these people were brought into a room, and half the people were given, or all of them were given bowls of soup. Half of them had bowls of soup that just was, once you eat it, it's done. As you eat it, it disappears, right? Then the other half of the people in the room were given bowls of soup that had like this hose hooked up to the bottom of it, and it replenished the soup as it was being eaten. That's truly bottomless soup. If you've been to Olive Garden, right, you have to order more soup. This soup automatically replenishes itself. The people who ate the bottomless soup ate 2.5 times more than the people who just had one bowl of soup, because they couldn't see, if they couldn't see that it was leaving the bowl, they had no idea how much was enough. So they just kept eating because it was there. And as I was thinking about this topic, I like to think of myself as a generous person. I like to think of myself as a person who doesn't necessarily pursue more, that I'm content with enough. But the reality is that's not always the case for me. And that definitely hasn't been always the case for me. And maybe for you today, you think of yourself as a generous person. I think most Americans, and definitely most Christian Americans, would think of themselves as generous people. There's a book called American Generosity, and it finds that 84% of Americans give 0 to 1% of their income away each year. It's amazing. 84% of our culture doesn't give anything or very, very little away. We think that we're generous. We have all of this stuff. We have all of these possessions. We have storage units to house the possessions we can't fit into our homes, right? And we give 0 to 1% away. At least 84% of Americans do. Only 3% of American Christians give at the level of a tithe. Now, if you grew up in church, that's a churchy word. A tithe is this kind of this principle that was introduced in the Old Testament with the nation of Israel and with God. And God institutes this principle with the nation of Israel where they will harvest their crops, they will, tend their livestock, they will sell their possessions, they will have whatever income they have, whatever income streams they have, they're called to give the first 10% of that back to God. They're to make sacrifices, they're to give financially, they're to give the best 10% away. That was the way that the covenant with God worked in the Old Testament. And so many times in the church you hear the term first fruits, we'll never say it here, but you might have heard that growing up, or you even hear the word tithe. Basically, a tithe is just 10% of your income being given back to God. And it was this declarative statement by the nation of Israel saying, okay, God, we're going to trust you to provide for us, and as a token of our trust in you, we're going to give 10% back to you. In the United States, American Christians only 3% of American Christians give at that level. That was the baseline. That was the lowest rung on the ladder in the Old Testament. Only 3% of American Christians, people who say they follow God, give at that level. 97% of people who follow God don't give, not 10%. Now, if I can just be vulnerable with you and honest with you for a minute as we kind of start this. There is not a topic that I can think of that has caused more arguments, that has hurt more feelings, that has raised more voices in my marriage than the topic of generosity and contentment. My wife and I have argued about it for the better part of 20 years. And it's something that I've had to grow in. So I'm not coming to you today as this expert Dave Ramsey guy who gives 90% of his income away and I just live on 10% and you guys stink as Christ followers, okay? I grew up with very little. My mom didn't work, my dad did, but he worked in a factory. We didn't make a lot of money. And I know we never missed meals, but I can remember groceries showing up on our front door because we didn't have money to buy food. We lived in 17 different places from the time I was 10 years old until I was 18 years old because my parents never owned a house. They rented, and so we either couldn't pay our rent or our landlord decided to sell the house, and so we had to move again and again and again and again. I came home from college my freshman year, and my parents lived in a different home. I had to call them from a payphone and ask them where they moved to. Maybe that was just them trying to get rid of me, and it wasn't anything about money. And so when I was 11 years old, I got a job at the farm that was next to our house, baling hay. And I had a job from the time I was 11 until this day because I just felt like, you know what? I'm not going to rely on my parents to provide for me. I can't rely on my parents to provide for me. I want more than they have. I want to live better than they live. I want to have more stuff than they have. I want to have a different lifestyle than they've had. I don't want to have to move all the time. I don't want to have to worry about the next meal. I want to have more than them. And so from the time I was 11 years old, if I wanted to have a car, I had to buy it. If I wanted to have car insurance, I had to pay for it. If I wanted to have gas money, I had to provide it. If I wanted to have money to go out on a date, I had to provide it. My parents provided for us with food and clothes, but if I wanted to have anything beyond what they provided, any name brand shoes, any name brand clothes, I had to buy them myself. I had to earn it. And so I became very protective of the things that I earned. I had this scarcity mindset. I was fearful that what if I can't have all the things that I want to have? So generosity flies in the face of scarcity. They're polar opposites. Here's what's weird. My wife grew up very similar to me. She was not wealthy at all. Both of her parents worked, but they didn't make a lot of money. She got a job when she was 14 years old. She worked 3 jobs to pay for our wedding. Neither of our parents could afford to give us very much money at all for our wedding, so she worked 3 jobs for almost a year to pay for it. She knows the value of hard work, but she had this belief that it was God that provided for the things that she had. So generosity just flowed naturally for her. Me, I thought hard work provided it. I thought people were going to try to take what I was earning. And so we get married and these forces of nature just collide in our marriage relationship. And we've had to go over this over and over and over again. In the first 10 years of our marriage, it was really rocky. And as I said, I've grown into some of the things that I say I believe, but it was hard at first. It was hard to have my heart catch up with what I knew to be biblical, what I knew to be right. And so today, what I want to do is I want to look at a guy that I can relate to, that I think you might be able to relate to. He had more, and he began to settle for enough. And his name is Zacchaeus. And typically what we do when I'm teaching, the typical kind of flow to a message is I'll read a passage of Scripture, and then we'll go back and we'll kind of pull principles out of it. What I want to do this morning is I want to kind of stop and make some observations along the way, and then I'll leave you with some principles at the end that I think we can take with us. We're going to look at the book of Luke, chapter 19, verses 1 through 9. We're just going to read the first 2 verses together right now. It says, Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. Now, just in the first 2 verses of this passage, we get to know a lot about Zacchaeus, who he was, and the social and economic status he has in that community. Zacchaeus knows money. He's good at making money. He's very wealthy. He understands money. He's highly motivated by money. Now, Israel at this time in history had been conquered and overtaken by Rome. And the Romans were pretty brilliant because in the Old Testament, if you look at some of the wars that were fought in the Old Testament, a country would come and they would invade Israel and they would conquer Israel and then they would exile the people out of Israel. Rome had a different philosophy. Rome said, hey, all of you guys can stay. We're just going to tax the heck out of you. All right? So you can live in Jerusalem. You can be Israelites. You can be Jewish people. You can have your identity. You can have your community. We're just going to impose our will and our taxes on you. And so that's how Rome became very powerful. They didn't exile people out of their country. They just made them pay to be there at a higher rate that they would have to pay otherwise. And so the Roman government would hire people who were Jewish, who knew people in that community, to collect the taxes, because they didn't have 1099s and W-2s that they would send into the government at that time. People had to know where the wealth was, and these people who were Israelites, who were Jewish people, could say, oh, he's got some money, oh, he's got some money, oh, he's got some cattle. You should tax him at a higher rate. And so these people, these tax collectors, these Jewish tax collectors would work for the Roman government, and they were despised by the Jewish people. Jewish people hated them. They classified them as the same level as sinners and people who are far from God. And that's Zacchaeus. He's already sold out all of his relationships and all of his community. Nobody likes him, and he's okay with that because he's rich. And he's really good at being rich. But there comes a point in his life, and we're going to see it here, that he has all of this money in his bank account, but he has little peace in his soul. And so he starts hearing these rumblings about this guy named Jesus. And Jesus has this entourage, Jesus has this following, Jesus has this momentum. And he thinks, man, if I could just get to see Jesus, if I could just be in the presence of Jesus, maybe that would be what I'm looking for. And we said this before, we'll say it again. One of the most fascinating things about the ministry of Jesus that we see in this passage is people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. Like people who are far from God, people who were despised by other people, people who were pushed to the outsides and the margins, they loved being around Jesus. And so here you have this tax collector, this person who has no friends, that you would never expect to have a desire to be with Jesus, this Jewish rabbi. But he does. And so he does the strangest thing. Verse 3, he tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. Now, what's interesting about this is the word ran. See, Middle Eastern men who have wealth never run. Like that is a despicable thing to do. That is a low-class thing to do. Great men never run. Great men are run to. One of the most scandalous things about the story that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 15 of the prodigal son, when the prodigal son decides to come home, what does his father do? He runs to him, right? And so people who would be listening to this parable that Jesus is telling, they would be like, no, his dad would never run to him. That's a sign of humility. That's a sign of desperation. His dad would never run. He's a wealthy man. People would run to him. Well, this is a true story about a guy who has all the money that he ever will need, and he runs to Jesus because he's desperate for him. And one of the things that I've realized in my life is desperation will always allow you to overcome your pride. When you're desperate for God, it will allow you to do things that your pride will never let you do. And that's where Zacchaeus finds himself. And so he starts running to Jesus, and we're told in the story that he's short, and he climbs up in this tree. Now, I don't think in 20 years of ministry, I cannot remember ever teaching on this passage. And I think part of the reason why is this. Those of you that grew up in church, do you remember this song? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see, and as the Lord passed that way, he looked up in the tree and said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. I cannot get this out of my mind. Like I've just been saying it all morning. And there's just this repellent that I don't want to teach that because I see this flannel graph and this tree and this wee little man. He's a wee little man, all right? And he's short and he can't see Jesus and he climbs up in this tree. I'm like, okay, I get it. Children's ministry worship has come a long way since I was a kid. That's all I have to say. They're not singing about Zacchaeus being a wee little man back there. I guarantee you that. But he's short. And maybe that's why he pursues money. Because money can make you feel big. Money can make you feel more important. Money can make you appear to have it more together than you really do. And so Zacchaeus is short in physical stature, but he's large in economic stature. And everybody knows he's the rich executive tax collector. When I was in high school, I had a Fiero because it was supposed to look like a Ferrari, but it wasn't. It was a Pontiac, and mine was $3,000, and I thought I was like the man because I drove this Fiero Ferrari-looking thing, and it was plastic, but then it caught on fire and blew up because it was a piece of junk. But it looked really good, all right? Like if you just looked at the front half, you're like, oh my gosh, that kid's got some money. Now I just worked at Noble Romans, all right? I paid $3,000 for this thing, but I saved up my money. But I thought I was so special because I had this impressive-looking car until it burst into flames because it was a piece of junk. But that's what money does to us, right? Money can allow us to feel like we're better than we really are. And that's where Zacchaeus finds himself. And then the most amazing thing happens. He's up in this tree. He doesn't want anybody to see him. He's hiding out, just trying to get a glimpse of Jesus. And then look what happens in verse 5. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. Now, I want you to think about this from the perspective of the people who are involved in the story. Jesus is a respected rabbi. His ministry is taking off. He has this entourage of people that are following him from town to town just to hear him speak. People are flocking to him just to try to touch him, to get him to heal them. They're bringing their kids to him to try to get him to perform a miracle with their sick kid. Everybody wants a piece of Jesus. I imagine the dinner invitations were too numerous to count. And so Jesus doesn't even look at the crowd. He looks up in a tree and he says, oh, you know what? The most disrespected, the most hated guy, I'm going to your house. And people ought to be thinking, really, Jesus? Like out of all the people that you could choose, out of all the good people, out of all the religious people, out of all the smart people, out of all the respected people, you choose the most disrespected, the most hated, the most despised person that you could possibly, the chief tax collector, to go to his house? And this story for me is a reminder that no matter where you've been, no matter what your story is, it's never too bad to not have Jesus want to pursue you. Maybe you failed, maybe you filed bankruptcy, maybe your life is a train wreck right now. Maybe you have been dishonest, maybe you've been greedy, maybe you've cheated, maybe you've been in prison, maybe you sacrificed relationships at your work because you stepped on people to try to get ahead, try to make yourself more promotable, try to make yourself more impressive. And so you've compromised the relationships of people maybe in your own life because your success was more important than them. Can I just say that Jesus still wants to be with you? That's what this story reminds me of. He loves bringing grace to anybody who will open themselves up. Verse 6, Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. He has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner, they grumbled. So here you have this guy who spent years cheating people, who spent years taxing people, who spent years going against his own identity and his own people in favor of the Roman government. And he's far from God, and he has no relationship with God, and he has no desire to be in a relationship with God because he loves money more than he could ever love God. And he is so pumped to have the Son of God go to his house. Then you have these other people who've walked with God, who know God, who follow Jesus all over the place, who are considered to be religious leaders and know a lot about God, and they're hacked off that Jesus would ever spend a moment with this notorious sinner. It's just this realization that church people are oftentimes the biggest obstacle to people who are far from God coming to know God. Because we're the most judgmental of other people, and we put more obstacles in people's way than God ever would. Verse 8, meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half of my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. So something happens at Zacchaeus' house. Something happens over this dinner. And Zacchaeus is captivated by the possibility of this new way of life and what it means for him. And so he recalculates the importance of everything in his life. And he says, you know what? I'm going to give away 50%. Because 50% of what I have with God is better than 100% of what I can have and not have God. And so he makes this declarative statement. He makes this value shift in his life. And this is how Jesus responds. Verse 9, Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. Now, I've read over this text 100 times, and maybe you've heard this story 100 times. I never even really took into account what the last phrase means. It just kind of sounds weird, to be a true son of Abraham. But in that culture, to be called a son of Abraham or to be called a son of Sarah, which were the matriarch and patriarch of the Jewish people, was a huge compliment. And my guess is, as the chief tax collector for the Roman government, Zacchaeus has never been called the son of Abraham. He's probably been called the son of something else, but he hasn't been called the son of Abraham. And so Jesus speaks life and identity, and he reclaims who Zacchaeus was created to be. He said, your occupation doesn't define you. Your sins don't define you. Your past doesn't define you. Who you are is who I say that you can be. And he says, salvation has come to this house, son of Abraham. He gives an identity back to Zacchaeus. And that term salvation has come to this house. It's not because Zacchaeus gave 50% of his stuff away. He didn't buy his way into heaven. We use the term salvation a lot in the church. Sometimes it does mean being saved from sin. Sometimes it does mean that we experience salvation when we turn from our way and we pursue a relationship with Jesus. That is salvation. In this particular passage, the word salvation is translated healing or deliverance. It means that for now, in this moment, Zacchaeus, that the disease of more that has been eroding his soul, he's being healed from, he's being delivered from. That Jesus is transforming and he's making all things new. And so what I want to do, just a few minutes that we have left, is I want to just give you 4 kind of practical principles in light of this story, in light of some of the experiences that Zacchaeus has and maybe that you've had, 4 things that we can do to pursue enough rather than to constantly pursue more. And the first is this. You can be satisfied with your money, but you'll never be satisfied in your money. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10 and 11 says this, those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. And those people are called kids, okay? So the more you have, the more your kids will spend what you have, all right? He doesn't really say that. This is my professional interpretation, okay? And so there's a picture in some version of the Bible of just a debit card right there that you just hand to your kids, all right? That's been my life. Well, last week, I had breakfast with a friend of mine, and he and his family have been friends of ours for almost 15 years. So we've known each other a long time, and we've been having breakfast for 2 years at least. Once a month, once every other month, whenever we're not so busy. We sit down, and about 5 or 6 months ago, we're sitting at breakfast. He's like, you know what? I think I'm done. I'm like, done with what? He's like, I think I'm just going to cash out. I think I'm going to retire. I'm not really happy with my job, and I think I'm done. Now, this guy is a picture of success, especially in Hamilton County. Nice house, nice cars, great possessions, vacation home. If you said, what does it look like to be successful, he would be a picture of that in our culture. And I just thought he had a bad week at work. I'm like, that's not true. That's not going to happen. Well, we get together for breakfast, and he texts me. He's like, can we get together for breakfast? I'm like, yeah, when? He's like, I have all the time in the world. I'm unemployed. I'm like, oh, he's for real. Like, he's done. And so over the last 4 months, we've sat down probably 2 or 3 different times. He has gotten happier and happier the more I sat down with him. Now, part of that is he's playing a lot of golf. But the biggest shift that I've seen in my friend is he is now starting to find success and significance in his faith and his family and not his finances. And it's been inspiring to me. It's been a huge gift just to see this kind of play out in front of me. And and here's the deal. He hasn't sold everything. He still has a house, still has cars. He hasn't gone and made a vow of poverty. You know why? Because those possessions aren't bad. They're not wrong. They're innate possessions, right? Your bank account is not bad. Your car isn't bad. The house that you live in, not bad. You know why? Because they're just things. They can't be bad in and of themselves. It's when we start looking to them to find satisfaction that they distract us from the satisfaction that only God can give. So this isn't a call just to abandon your job and say, okay, I'm just going to be, vow of poverty. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when you and I start trying to find our satisfaction in our money and not just with our money, with our possessions, with the things that we have, we're always going to come up short. Secondly, generosity is never about how much I give. It's always about how willing I am to give. 2 Corinthians 9:7 says this, you must each decide in your heart how much to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure, for God loves a person who gives cheerfully. I mentioned to you that this idea, this concept has been a tense moment in our marriage relationship. And it really, the worst argument that Trish and I have ever had about this came 1 year into our marriage. I was a youth pastor in Ohio, and we took our student ministry to a concert, a Third Day concert. If you're not familiar with Third Day, think Christian Hootie and the Blowfish, okay? So it's a Christian concert. And so at the intermission of this concert, this guy comes out on stage, and he starts giving this appeal for Compassion International. Compassion International is this organization that sponsors kids all around the world, and for $24 a month, you can sponsor a child. And he flashes some pictures up there. He's been to Nairobi, Kenya, and he's got this video, and he's like, okay, when I count to 3, if you want to sponsor a child, we have volunteers all over the stadium. They've got packets in their hand. I want you to just raise your hand. He didn't even get to 2, and my wife stands up, holds her hand up. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm going to sponsor a kid. I'm like, we're in this together. We didn't talk about this. There's no conversation here. She's like, I'm doing this. And so we get in an argument about this in front of our student ministry at a Third Day concert, listening to songs about Jesus. We're arguing about it. I said, you know what? We'll just talk about this at home. She's like, well, I'm taking the packet home. Because at that point in history, I don't think debit cards even existed. You had to write a check every month. So we get home, and she's like, what is the big deal? She's like, it's $24 a month. I said, we've been married a year. We have a kid who's like 3 months old. I need him sponsored. I make $16,000 a year, all right? Somebody should send us $24 a month. I don't have $24 a month to be sending somebody else halfway around the world that I never even met. Or something like that. And she said, to try to guilt trip me, she said, you know what, if your heart's not in it, then we shouldn't do it. And she thought it was going to guilt me into it. You know what it did? Released me. I said, you're right, we shouldn't. So, we did not get divorced at that point. Fast forward 15 years. We write our book. We get ready to go on this speaking tour. Compassion International approaches us. We'd like to sponsor your speaking tour, 13 cities. You speak for a while, have a musical guest go with you. They play some music. They come out, they give us appeal. I'm like, I know how it works. At that point, just to not be hypocritical, we had sponsored a child in Guatemala. We were sponsoring a child in Colombia. So I wasn't completely hypocritical, okay? And so we go on this 13-city tour getting kids for Compassion International sponsored. So we have all these packets of kids. If you've been to concerts, you've seen these things, right? All over our house. One night, our son Elijah goes to a concert. He comes home from the concert. He's in tears. We're sitting on the couch. I'm like, what is going on? He's like, the concert was amazing. I'm like, what? I've been to the concert for that band. It's not that amazing. He's like, no, the guy came out and talked, and he gave this spiel about this kid in Nairobi, Kenya, and he needs $36 a month because it's gone up now, and he's $36 a month, and I need to sponsor him. The Holy Spirit just spoke to my heart and said, you need to sponsor that child. And I said, you don't even have a job. He's like, no, but I had your debit card. And so he's like, we're all good. That's a true story right there, isn't it? That's 100% true. Every month. So he has this packet. I'm like, there's packets all over this house. He's like, not Holy Spirit inspired like this one. 6 months later, we get invited, or we were in Nairobi, Kenya, Elijah and I, and Compassion drives Brian, the child that we sponsor, 4.5 hours to spend the day with us. And we bought him a pair of shoes, we bought him some clothes, we bought him some toys. We went to this makeshift amusement park with him. And then he went back to the life that he was living. And we flew home. And what I thought on that flight home was I thought about the 15 years I missed with the first child from Nairobi. And the $24 a month that I probably would have never missed. And my heart changed, right? God didn't want to change my behavior. He just really wanted to change my heart. And that's why you have to decide in your heart what you're going to give. I'm not going to dictate that to you. That's why I don't even know what people give here. I don't track it. You know why? Because I don't want to treat you differently because you give a lot or a little. And so I want to equally tick off people, no matter what their income status is. All right? So if you get mad at me and you give $1,000 a week, all right. If you get mad at me and you give $1 a week, if you don't give it all, we never charge admission here. And I'll never know it. Because it's not about our money, it's about our heart. Generosity is never about your checkbook. It's never about your bank account. It's always about your heart. And that's why God says very specifically, each of us should decide what we're going to give, and it should be an overflow of your relationship with God. Thirdly, and as we close here, enough isn't a level of wealth you achieve, it's a level of trust you declare. This isn't my quote, it's a quote from a guy that I love named John Ortberg. He's an author and a pastor. And I just thought it was so profound that I just wanted to include it in today's message. As most of you guys know, we adopted two amazing kids, 6 weeks ago. And we had a 3-week heads up on this adoption. So June 1st to June 22nd. And they have transformed our lives. They've been in our life for 6 weeks, and it's like they've been there forever. We started going out to eat with them. They'd never been to a sit-down restaurant before. And so we were at Chick-fil-A, and the first few times we were out to eat, they wouldn't eat. They would talk all the way to the restaurant about how hungry they were. We got to the restaurant, they would eat a couple bites, like, I'm going to take this home. I'm going to take this home. I'm going to take this home. Finally, after 3 or 4 times, I said to one of them, we're going to have dinner tonight, and we're going to have breakfast tomorrow, and we're going to have lunch tomorrow, and we're going to have dinner tomorrow night. You don't have to take that home. You can eat that right here. Janiyah just gonzo that. It's just gone. Like in 2 seconds, it was gone. See, once they trusted that they were going to have a meal, because they didn't always have that luxury, they were willing to know that I was going to provide for them. And I look back over the course of my relationship with God, there's been moments where I've just said, I don't trust you, God. I mean, I know you provide. I know that all good things come from you, but I think I got this. So I'm just going to take this home. And the scarcity mindset that I've grown up with, that I've fought against my whole life with God, rears up sometimes. And what I'm saying is to God, I don't really think that you're as trustworthy as me. I think I can provide for me more than you provide for me, so I'm just going to keep this to myself. And so the question I'm asking myself these days is, how can I trust God more? See, God doesn't necessarily want your money. He doesn't need it. He owns everything. What he wants is your heart. And when you and I give, when we're generous, it's a declaration of our trust in God. It's not a declaration about a church or even your religious beliefs. It's a declaration that you trust God to provide for you more than you trust yourself. Finally, a growing relationship with God will always equate to a growth in generosity. Look at verse 8 of chapter 19. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half of my wealth to the poor, Lord. If I've cheated anybody on their taxes, I will give back 4 times as much. I don't know what took place. We don't really get an inside view of what took place between the tree and the house when Zacchaeus stands up and tells the dinner party this, but something took place, a conversation. And Zacchaeus comes to this conclusion that, you know what? If I'm going to follow Jesus, then it's going to equate to generosity. And I can look back at my life and I can say, okay, 20 years ago I was not a generous person. And I don't think I'm as generous as I want to be right now. I know that I'm not. But I'm making steps. I'm taking strides. And one of the things that Trish and I have done over the last probably 5 years that's really been helpful for us, every year between Christmas and New Year's, the week between Christmas and New Year's, I take that week off, and we spend some time together as a family, and we just kind of veg out. And then we set aside one day to set family goals, individual goals, family goals, and kind of spiritual, financial goals, stuff like that. We gather at a Starbucks, and we all talk through our goals for that next year. And one of the things that Trish and I have shifted over the last probably 5 years is we have multiple streams of income. Like we have a book, we have speaking, that we go and do marriage conferences. So we, just like probably you, we make more today than we did 5 years ago. I'm sure many of you make more today than you did 5 years ago. It's kind of how the American economic system works. Cost of living adjustments are kind of built into our economy. And so rather than looking at our 2018 in December and saying, okay, how much are we going to make next year? We started saying, how much can we give next year? How much do we want to give next year? And it just shifts. It's just a subtle shift, but it shifts our perspective in that we are going to have to trust God to be generous. And so we don't set financial goals of how much we can make, how much we can acquire, how much we can save, how much we can, put away. What we say is, how much can we give? And everything else will flow out of that. And it's been helpful for me, of a person who has had it ingrained in their heart that you have to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you have to work hard or you're not going to have anything. it's helped me say, okay, God, I would have nothing without you. And as my relationship with you grows, I want to become more generous. And I'm not always going to go there, but I'm going to trust that you're going to help me get there. And I want to look back on my life 20 years from now, and I want to say, man, look how generous I am today compared to how generous I was 20 years ago. And can I tell you, that doesn't happen by accident. You have to change what you care about. You have to change not just the choices that you make, but the values that you have. And when you do that, God takes over and he does what he's already doing. He provides for you. And you can trust him more than you can trust your ability to earn or acquire or to save. Let's pray together. God, we thank you so much just for all that you gave to us. And God, I know many of us I grew up in a kind of this system where the church seemed like it was all about money. It seemed like it was just something that we had to do to be a part of the church. And God, you don't want our obligatory money, you want our hearts. And so we come from different places in this room. We come financially from different places. We come spiritually from different places. The thing I love about you, God, is you are patient, and you are kind, and you meet us right where we're at. And so, God, we want to be a church that's radically generous. Will you help us grow in individual generosity so that we can become a movement in this city that people look at and say, man, they just give themselves away. Their time, their talents, their resources. So, God, we give you our hearts, we give you all that's greater, and ask that you help us to live greater stories and greater lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here today. Thank you guys for an incredible summer. I know school starts for many of us, some of us tomorrow, some of us next week. And so if you have to go to school, sorry. But have a great week, and we'll see you next week.